I'm Kristen Ludlow from NBA Inside Stuff, and you're listening to the Double Clutch Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Double Clutch Podcast. I'm Mike Miller, and as usual, joined by Mr. Joe Hulbert himself.
Hi Mike, good to be back.
Always good to be back. And for the first time on the show, but not his first time on the podcast, because you'll have caught his interview a couple of weeks ago with senior producer for NBA 2K, Rob Jones. It's Timi Awotesu.
Hi Mike, glad to finally be on.
It's good to get you on, man. How's it going?
Cheers, man. I'm doing well. You know, I'm excited. Let's get it. You know, just ready to get it going. Excited for the season.
Good. Oh, it's still too far away for my liking. We've got media days starting and everything like that, and I just want it to be tip-off time. But since it's your first time on the show, do you want to tell the listeners a bit about you, how you got into hoops, that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. So I got into basketball about 10 years ago now, and it was just completely random. I just watched my first game on TV. It was, I think it was a Lakers-Nuggets game, and then the Lakers won. So I was like, okay, this is a cool team. And then I saw, I think I downloaded, it was like NBA Live demo, 2 days later, because I was like, oh, let me get the game and see what it's saying. And the Lakers were on there as well, and I was like, oh, this must be a good team. I'll support them. And so that's literally the reason why I've been a Lakers fan for the last 10 years. Enjoyed it in my early days with the back-to-back championships. It sucked for the last 5, but it looks like the tide's turning. So, yeah.
I was going to say that. So you went, because they were obviously the biggest team. You happened to see them, and then you've had to suffer through what has probably been one of the driest spells in Laker history.
Oh, it's been horrible. It's been tough, But hey, there's light at the end of the tunnel. I'm ready.
Yeah,
I'm ready for it.
Yeah, well, you can't really argue with the arrival of the king. But we're not going to talk Lakers today. This is the second of our 6 divisional previews, and we're going to be going east and looking at the Atlantic Division. So, probably ought to just explain what we're doing in case you missed last week's episode. We're going to go same as that. We're going to go, each of us is going to talk about the good, the bad, the ceiling and the floor for these teams, whichever way you want it is either a really weird Western or some kind of dance move. The Atlantic Division has the Raptors, the Celtics, the 76ers, the Knicks, and the Nets. Is it fair to say that for the most part, this division is probably the strongest in the East?
I would say it's got the best teams. I think in terms of parity, I'd maybe look at the Central as being a bit more competitive. I mean, because you've got 2 teams in this division who've got no chance of probably going.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't thinking parity.
yeah, definitely the strongest. You've got three finals, probably the 3 finals contenders in this conference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, top 3 teams in the teams in the East in this division, and they're going to slug it out. So I think it's definitely the best of the 3.
Excellent. So we're in agreement there. So let's we're going to go run through them in the order they finished in last year. So we're going to start with the Toronto Raptors, who had a franchise record 59-23 last year. For me, they've had a really interesting summer actually. Let's just quickly recap what happened last year. So they had the franchise record in games 1. They had DeMar DeRozan in the regular season playing particularly well. Dwayne Casey got Coach of the Year, which was voted on before the playoffs started. Maybe it would have been a different outcome afterwards, because after winning in the first round 4-2 against the Wizards, they got absolutely waxed by the Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference semi-finals. Getting swept, it cost Casey his job, and there's been a massive shake-up in Toronto with the biggest trade of the summer by a long shot in DeMar DeRozan for Kawhi Leonard. Joe, do you want to start us off on the Raptors?
Yeah, this was an interesting one because throughout this regular season, I really praised Dwayne Casey for how he changed the offense, but it became very apparent from Raptors insiders that it wasn't actually him who changed the offense. He just delegated it to Nick Nurse. So some are saying that maybe the Casey departure will hurt them. I don't think it will. I think the big difference between last year and the years before was the offense. I know it kind of went to crap in the postseason, but I think that was more personnel than scheme. So I think Nick Nurse is going to come in. He's going to give them a fresh voice. The problem Toronto had against Cleveland is they went back to a lot of their bad habits, when actually I think they need a different voice who makes sure they stick to the very well designed plays he comes up with. So I'm quite excited for this team. They've got, the thing that's going under the radar actually is the Danny Green pickup. I know he's not the player he was, back in those Spurs final runs, but he's going to add great spacing to go alongside the playmakers they already have. So, yeah, I'm one of the more positive people about this coaching change. I think KC was very limited. It was every playoff game. It just felt like he was up against it, even against like Ty Lue. So change was needed.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree and disagree. I think that it would have been interesting to see how Dwayne Casey would move forward with this new team, and obviously a new talent in Kawhi Leonard. It's easy to talk about it with hindsight because the decision to move on from him was ultimately before the whole Kawhi Leonard situation even really picked up. So you can't really think about it in the sense that, if things had gone differently because of just the way the timeline played out. But I think that they've definitely improved. Kawhi Leonard is a massive improvement. And like you said, Joe, I think they're really sleeping on this Danny Green pickup. Not only for his spacing, but also the fact that he plays both ends of the floor. DeMar DeRozan, they really tried to stress this fact that, he really improved his shooting. He really tried to get better this season, but he was still a below average shooter. And now you've got two guys who are very efficient from behind the arc, and both two guys that really play the floor. So it's definitely an improvement. I think it's going to be a positive thing to see. As for Nick Nurse, he might have the offensive, intuitiveness, and we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. I always get a bit concerned with sort of first timers and guys all of a sudden getting the reins, because it's more than just how you coach the team, it's how you manage the talent. So we'll have to see how that plays out and whether there's any issues there. But given the fact he has been on the team as an assistant for a while, it shouldn't be as big as a problem as it could be for someone maybe like a David Blatt when he came on, and obviously there's no one like LeBron in Toronto. So
yeah, I think we're pretty much all on the same page here. I like the fact they moved on from DeRozan because they've replaced him with, as you mentioned, Kawhi Leonard. So if he's healthy and engaged, he's easily a top 5 player in the league, possibly even top 3. It's a chance to reset the team's mentality, which I felt is what their downfall was. Joe, you mentioned they sort of reverted to old habits in the playoffs, and I remember when they got ousted, Matt and I podded, and for me it wasn't Casey's coaching, and fair enough, he was delegating the offense to Nurse, but to me that's a sign of a coach, that a good coach who can manipulate these different assistants into creating a better whole. To me, the reason they reverted to those habits was the leadership on the team. DeRozan was he was being sat in games. He got thrown out of one, and that's not even meant to be a slight on him, because he was a great player in his time there. He just wasn't the guy they needed to get them to the next level. I'm not convinced he's the guy who can lead you to a finals. He's just not that franchise player for me. The bad side of it was essentially the loss of your core player and your head coach, who have been there for a long time in the same summer, could create some instability in the franchise. And if the Kawhi gamble doesn't pay off and he bolts next summer, it's going to look terrible. I agree with Timmy about rookie head coach, but that, again, doesn't mean a huge amount given his experience and the praise that's been lauded over him, not just on this podcast, but in general. Timmy, what's the ceiling for this team?
I think this team can be a 60-win team. I think if they can get everything clicking, it's not as easy to just say, you take out DeMar and switch in for Kawhi, but there's no reason that can't be the case. And, with an improved defensive player, a guy who can go get you 28 points per game when healthy, if he's able to stay healthy this season, obviously coming off quite a tumultuous year, he missed like 73 games. But if he's ready to go and he can play a full season and if it just clicks from the go, then 60 wins for sure. And they can definitely be the number 1 seed again this year. And with LeBron gone especially, and sort of like those sort of the curse almost lifted from the Eastern Conference playoffs, there's no reason why they can't challenge the Celtics for a place in the NBA Finals.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we should probably ought to caveat this now that we're breaking things down into the good, the bad, the ceiling and the floor. The good for every team certainly the first three we'll be talking about is that LeBron is no longer in the same conference. So yeah, Joe, ceiling for this team.
Yeah, I think the ceiling's a lot higher than it was last year. I've got some DeMar DeRozan stats. I want to make one thing very clear. DeMar DeRozan is a legend for that franchise. I think certainly in the time I've been watching the league, I didn't quite get to see Bosh in Toronto, so I don't know how good he was. I mean, if he was half the player he was in Miami, he would have been great. But he's a legend. He rebuilt this franchise. He put them on his back. But you cannot ignore the statistics in the playoffs. So in that Cavs series, they were 33 points worse per 100 with him on the court. And I didn't just look at series they lost. I actually looked at series they won. And the numbers without Kyle Lowry in the last three they've won, the net ratings are minus 40, minus 26, minus 27. So that shows, and I am getting somewhere with this. A lot of people have said that the Raptors traded their best player. They didn't trade their best player. They traded their second best player, in my opinion. Not even close. I think the problem they have with DeRozan in the playoffs is that it essentially became a 4-on-5 when he wasn't on the ball. He offers nothing off the ball. No one respects him as a shooter, and I question his engagement on sort of back cuts and stuff like that. Now you've got Kawhi Leonard, you're not going to have those 4-on-5 situations. So that makes their ceiling. I agree with Timmy in the win sense. I'm looking anywhere between 60, 64, that kind of thing. But I actually think their limit is the second seed, because I really, as we'll get to in a minute, I think Boston are I think they're the best team in this conference by quite a distance.
Okay, I like the Lowry take. I've going back on the pod, I've said before that these two guys have struggled to sort of step up and one of them lead the team, and there's been sort of, in my opinion, a sort of a conflict of an identity crisis, let's call it, where one of them tries to lead, then the other one tries to lead, and you haven't got that alpha on the team. Lowry sort of took a step back from me last season in the regular season, so maybe he was just holding it off for the playoffs. The ceiling for these guys, for me, I think they could be the 1 seed and go to the finals. Last week on the what did we do last week? Northwest. I can't remember which conference, which division we did last week, but we talked a lot about some of the defensive lineups, and it scares me how good this team could be if they go small ball with something like Serge, OG, Danny Green, Kawhi, and then Lowry just orchestrating that lineup.
Yeah,
could be ridiculous for switching and length. And both you are right. Danny Green is underrated in this trade. He's not a massive needle mover, but he's exactly what you want from a role playing 3-and-D guy. The floor for these guys, I can't see him slipping below the 3 seed. Can anyone see anything worse for these?
No, not really. I think that the only potential problem could be if obviously Kawhi isn't back to his full self, but I really don't see that happening at all. And so if everyone's healthy and they're playing no worse than the 3 seed, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I've got two things to say on the floor. I liked your point earlier, Timmy, about Nurse seeing if he can control this locker room. That is what could derail them, because schemes win NBA games, but it doesn't necessarily make a head coach. We've had some really gifted offense. Look at people like Alvin Gentry's never really taken off as a head coach. I know he did well last year, but the scheme isn't everything. You've got to be able to control locker room, you've got to be able to develop talent, and you've got to be able to make adjustments on the fly. That's really what makes great. So that could derail this team. The only one worry I have about this team, you mentioned Ibaka there, that's someone I'm worried about. I wrote a piece about 4 months ago for Def Pen Hoops, where I looked at his defense in the Cavaliers series. I don't know what it was. I don't know whether he's had a massive workload over the last sort of 9 years or so. He's played starter minutes every night, and he's gone deep into the postseason. But I thought he looked a little bit sort of broken at times. He was struggling out in space, but I think that could be offset by the fact now that they've got 2 lockdown wing defenders in OG Anunoby and Leonard. I don't know how you're going to score on that team, because not only are they good at winning one-on-one, which is what the playoffs comes down to, but they're so good in man defense, fighting through screens. So I'm going to be interested to see how Nurse sort of sets this defense up.
Yeah, and I think a guy we haven't even spoke about that I'm excited to see this season is Van Vliet. You know, he was excellent last season coming off the bench, and I think that he can be a real key piece for this team moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, their depth was one of their strong points last year. and they've retained the bulk of last season's roster, and Van Vliet's certainly one of the guys who could bring it. The Vegas over/under has them at 54.5. Somehow, I don't know how.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
I have them under though, because I think I've gone so far anti-East that I've got no team getting over 60, and I've not. This is me not thinking things through properly. I've not compensated for schedule weakness. I've got them down at 54 on the under, so I think I'm going to be the only one here. I've got them in the 2 seed as well. But what have you guys got them at?
Yeah, I mean, I've got them at I think I've got them at about 58 wins, because I think I believe that this team could get a 62 win season, but I think that something that could, rear an ugly head potentially is sort of the Kawhi Leonard situation. And if news reports come out, we already saw Ramona Shelburne talk about how the Clippers are probably number 1 on the list right now. Sometimes that can have effects on the team, maybe cause them to drop a few games, but still 57, 58.
I've got them over. The one thing I think derails the team, I think if they're not doing so well sort of around the deadline, and by not doing so well, I don't mean 20 and 30. I'm talking like, if they're like 28 and 20 at the deadline, I'd consider that quite poor, to be honest. I think if they're floating in that range, I think those Shelburne reports could get a little bit stronger and derail this team, but I've got them over quite comfortably at 59. But I think there's more ways their season could be derailed than the next 2 teams we're going to talk about.
Yep, and on that note, we're going to move over to the Boston Celtics, who 55 and 27 last year. Suffered horrific injuries from almost the opening tip. It was 5 minutes into the first game that Hayward twisted his foot round the wrong way. Kyrie went out with a knee injury that became infected. So they won the first round 4-3 against the Bucks, won the second round of the Eastern Conference against the 76ers 4-1, and then lost in the finals in 7 games to the Cavaliers. Timi, what are your thoughts on the Celtics?
I mean, it's clearly good that they're getting back Kyrie and what's his name? Gordon Hayward. There we go. Gordon Hayward from a team that was able to make it to the finals last year. But I think clearly they're going to have a season under their belt as well. Jason Tatum, the fact that he's just grown into something that people just didn't imagine this time last year. Talent, at the end of the day, you might have issues with chemistry, but you get talent and you try and make it work. And Brad Stevens is on his way, or some might even say already the best coach in the East. And I just think that you give him this kind of talent. You've seen what he did last season with no Kyrie, with no Hayward in the playoffs. If they're able to work it out and get it all together, then it could really be something special. I do have some fears because, will Kyrie and Terry Rozier clash? A lot of guys, one thing about when guys get injured is that obviously the next guy steps up. And when that person steps up and shows themselves to be great, the interviews of Terry Rozier saying, I'm willing to go onto the bench for the team are all well and good, but once you start to get that feeling of being the man and, he's got scary Terry and he's, starting in the big moments, it can be tough to go back. So that's my only real fear about the potential bad thing with this team is that sort of chemistry issue, almost having too much talent. But number 1 seed should be the expectation. NBA Finals should be the expectation for this team.
Yeah, I've got my notes for this team aren't very sort of statistical or diverse because I don't really know what sort of depth I could go into. I think they're the best team in the East by a distance. I've also written down I don't see a real weakness. I think they should be, should be top 5 in efficiency on both sides of the ball. I think one of the things last year when I watched this offense, I felt it was quite inconsistent sometimes, and I think that was the nature of the roster. They had Tatum and Brown with a lot of usage. I really rate both of these players. They're also very young players. One of the things I loved about Hayward in Utah was he was brilliant on multiple play types. He wasn't like running one play to death. He was good off the ball, on the ball, one-on-one, in team plays. He was brilliant. I think this offense is going to get faster. I think this offense is going to be more diverse. I think Gordon Hayward moves the needle that much. They were 5th in 3-point percentage last year. I honestly think that could go up and they could be hitting like Warriors level numbers. So I am very, very excited to watch this team play.
You're spot on. with your observations there, Joe. I've got down that their pace last year was 22nd out of 30. Offensive rating was 18th out of 30. Both will go up. Defensive rating was already first out of 30. Having Hayward and Kyrie back to full fitness is a blessing for a team that's already made its way to the conference finals. I like the fact they didn't overpay on Smart's contract this summer. Tatum and Brown are just seem to be growing at a rate that very few players grow at. I agree with Timi. The problems they have are great problems to have. There's just too much talent, and Brad Stevens is as incredible as he is so far. He's going to have his biggest challenge this year is going to be sort of smoothing over egos of guys who aren't getting the looks they got used to getting. I did wonder how much the cloud of the Jabari Bird issue will hang over the locker room and whether that's going to cause any distractions throughout the year. The ceiling for this team, easily the number one seed with a finals appearance. Either of you see a scenario where a complacent Golden State Warriors slip up and lose to the Celtics in the final?
I think it's possible with complacency. I would say injury more likely. Say the Warriors got a bit hobbled. I definitely think that because the Celtics are a relatively young team, they could take advantage of that. I just don't see the Celtics really getting complacent. The Warriors really getting complacent enough to fall to this team, especially it'll be a lot of guys' first times in the NBA Finals. We saw how Tatum and Brown and those young guys were in Game 7 at in Boston against LeBron and the Cavaliers. They just felt like it almost felt like they got the moment got too big for them, being that they were sort of, rookies and second years and didn't have that sort of go-to guy to look to when the tempo slowed down, and obviously playing against LeBron. So I think that you could potentially get some of that if they were to make the finals this year, which would sort of offset any complacency that Golden State may have because they're just getting bored of winning.
I thought the problem they had against the Cavs was certainly Tatum and Brown. One of them didn't turn up in Game 7. I think it was Brown. One of them had like 2 points or something ridiculous. I felt that he saw his name in lights. I don't know what that basically means for anyone who wouldn't know. It means that they see their name in the headlines the next day. Young star foils LeBron for the first time in 9 years or whatever. I think they've got to avoid that, but that's where I think Hayward helps. I think Hayward will keep that ball moving. I think he is, people talk about Kyrie. For me, Hayward is their best player, and I think he's the one I would hand the keys over to at the offense. So I think that's going to be the key for them. But the problem with the Warriors now that they've got DeMarcus Cousins, there's no real way you can sort of attack them. There's no way you can stop them, because before it used to be playing big, but now they've got one of the best big men in the league. So I don't see a scenario, but they can make it a series. And I've got one note down here. How on earth did he beat the Sixers in 5 last year with that roster? How did he do that?
I just loved the way they played last year. They in the playoffs particularly. People like Marcus Smart, who were just. I remember him jacking up 7 or 9 threes in a game and making one of them and not being afraid to take the shot. And for most guys, that would be sit your ass on the bench. And for him, it's you're still in the game because the next play he's taking a charge in the front court or he's doing something ridiculous and scrappy and throwing himself all over the floor, and he just gives them so much heart and energy. And if he can continue, if this new contract doesn't make him complacent, if he can continue like that, then I don't think it matters what sort of 5 they've got on the floor when you've got a guy who can set a commitment standard. Hard work can outwork talent, and I think if he sets that standard, then they're going to have a fun season. The floor for me, I think anything less than the 2 seed is a disappointment. I'm thinking really long. Well, I say really long. I'm thinking 12 months down the line as well. What have they got to do to keep Kyrie for next season? We're already hearing rumours. Kyrie's a weird one anyway. But if he goes, I wonder if this could be a short contention window for the Celtics, despite their young core.
I think that even if Kyrie leaves, that they can still be an elite team in the East. I just think that you look at what would have to happen moving forward is clearly the team would just need to run through someone else. I think it's interesting, Joe, that your thoughts that you think Gordon Hayward's the best player on this team. You look at a guy like Jason Tatum. I do think that people have gotten a little carried away and are sort of rating him as what he's going to be rather than everything that he's done so far, even though he was outstanding in the playoffs. But it's clear that I think this guy's going to be special. And if you are able to sort of bring back, remember, you've still got Terry Rozier and you've still got Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Gordon Hayward. We don't know what kind of moves the Celtics are going to make if any kind of big-time player becomes available in sort of 12 months. So I don't even see that as a serious problem for me in terms of them contending. But I do think that ultimately the floor, again, having too many egos and too many personalities in the locker room, like you said, Mike, anything less than the second seed would be a disappointment. I don't think it would be criminal if they were to say come second to the Toronto Raptors, because I do think they can be a special team. I don't see, again, injuries as well. Kyrie's been injury prone. I do think they can make it work without him in the lineup. We've seen them do it do it last season. But you would want to be at a point where you can have your best guys consistently on the floor. It can cause problems. It causes shakeups. Brad Stevens is a great coach that he'll be able to work around them. But, I would say that's something that could potentially affect them and cause them to slip away from that one seed, which they should be getting.
For floor, I've just got down that I don't know what the floor is because I just don't see anything that can go wrong for this team. They've just got everything. I think it might be the most complete roster in the league. Not in the East, in the league. There's just, they've got 48 minutes of elite defensive play and Horford and Baines. Baines, a guy who's not even mentioned. I know he's not exciting, but he embodied everything that team was last year.
Yeah, he does his job.
Yeah, gritty. That's exactly it. Do your job. That's the saying of the New England Patriots, the NFL team. You could put it to the Boston Celtics as well. So it's just, incredible roster. I don't really know how Danny Ainge did it because I remember a couple of years ago, this was a GM that I think a lot of people were saying his drafting sucks. But he's just done everything right to put this team in a position.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So the Vegas odds have them at 57.5. I'm going to have to get Nick to unlock this spreadsheet and rework my East because I've got them on the under at 57. I've just criminally underestimated the Eastern Conference this year. Although, no, actually, I've made these decisions. I'm going to stick with it and then just either look like a fool or an absolute genius in 9 months' time. What have you guys got for them?
I've got the over I've got them at 60. I could honestly see 65, but again, I was just kind of trying to make it all work in that spreadsheet. But yeah, the over quite comfortably.
Yeah, I'm the same. I think that they're going to be a 60-win team, but if they can get everything clicking, there's no reason why they can't be sort of what the Houston Rockets were last season and be in that 65, 64 range.
Oh, wow, that's high, 65.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool, fair enough. Over to the Philadelphia 76ers. So last season, 52-30, finishing in third in the Eastern Conference. They've had a bit of an interesting summer with Colangelo's... how should we put it? Indiscretions of his alleged wife and confidential player information and lots of burner accounts. Yep. That was a fun story. They won the first round 4-1 against the Heat, where Embiid just showed Whiteside what a franchise centre should look like before losing 4-1 to the Celtics in the semi-finals. Timmy, the Philadelphia 76ers, how much better are they going to be this year?
I have some concerns for this team, to be honest, in terms of being better, because I still think they're going to be a great team. They've got two of the best young talents in the league, but there's so much up in the air, and if it can sort of teeter either way, really. We look at Ben Simmons. I've heard that, you've sort of read that he is seriously working on his shot, but we still don't know if he's going to shoot left. Is he going to shoot right? Is he going to be able to shoot at all outside of 10 feet? These are all questions that we're still going to ask. And, I think you saw how he crumbled in that Celtics series. And obviously, Joe, you said, how did the Celtics beat the Sixers in 5? I think that was more bad Philly than it was good Celtics. I think the Celtics still would have won that series, but you saw the serious problems that they have from a sort of deficiency standpoint with Ben Simmons and just sort of their youth and inexperience, which obviously is natural. But Joel Embiid, he's come out, he's talked big this offseason. He said that he can be an MVP candidate. I certainly believe that he has the talent to do so. But again, with his injury history and the fact that they still had to sort of nurse him through the regular season, is he able to play, a full season now without him having to rest on back-to-backs and them have to be weary of him at every turn? I think that's a question that ultimately we'll have to wait and see. They got hit again with the injury demons when it comes to. I don't know why every single Sixers rookie feels the need to just take an injury. It's like part and parcel. Like they just get in their physical and just, I don't know. I just don't know what happens. But obviously, Isaiah Smith is injured, and I think a big loss for them is Ilyasova and Bellinelli. I think part of the reason why they were able to turn it around last season, because when Joel Embiid went down and Ben Simmons was absolutely just driving this team home on that, I think it was 13-game win streak that, jumped them to the 3rd seed. Bellinelli and Ilyasova coming in was a big part of that, and they've lost that, and that's a big part of their shooting. Obviously, JJ Redick's back, but I'm not too sure that this team will be better than they were next season, outside of Ben Simmons really stepping up his game in terms of from a shooting standpoint, and that still remains to be seen. So I got some concerns for them, but they're still going to be a great team. I still think they're going to be a top 3, the 3rd seed in the East.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Bellinelli, because I thought I was going to be the one who dropped that, and everyone was going to look at me like I'm an idiot. I also think that's it's a loss. The thing is with Bellinelli, I know when he's bad, he is bad, but when he's good, and he was very important for that bench. Then they've brought in Wilson Chandler. I'm not really a big fan of him. I think he's just kind of average across the board. The bigger pickup for me was Mike Muscala. I think he's going to help that bench unit quite a lot. He gives them size and 3-point shooting. But, the good for this team is obviously coaching. Their schemes are excellent. There's a lot of ball movement, a lot of player movement. The JJ Redick is going to be, he's just going to be so helpful again, because he's constantly doing something off the ball rather than just standing in the corner. I've also got something down about Robert Covington. He's been, I don't know how active you probably guys might not be as active on Twitter as I am, but Robert Covington, there's a lot of debate around him at the moment. I don't really get why. He is what he is to me. He's a fantastic defender and an inconsistent shooter. He's a good shooter. He's also streaky, but still ultimately good when you look at the stats. So I think I'm with you for this team. I think it's going to take internal improvement, but it's also going to take health. Like Joel Embiid, for all the talk he makes, he's had pretty much all of his seasons disrupted by injury. It's kind of, you can't be an MVP candidate if you're averaging, I think he averages 46 games a season in his 2 years. You're not an MVP candidate if you do that. That's what limits them more than anything.
That's almost a defensive player of the year candidate, though. 56 for Gobert. So the good for me, I don't care what people are saying about Simmons' jump shot at all. If you, I watched him at the London game. I watched him throughout the season. The shots he can make, there are very few people in the league who can make the shots he makes. The running hooks, off balance, little up and unders, and the scoops. He gets the bucket so easily. We see guys like Jason Kidd, whose nickname for the early part of the 2000s was Asen because he had no J, and he led the Nets to the finals. That doesn't worry me. That can come later on in his career when his athleticism stops him down, slows him down. You guys mentioned Bellinelli and Ilyasova. This is going to be the biggest impact on Simmons' performance for me, because they've lost that additional outside threat which spreads the floor. Like JJ Redick spreads the floor beautifully for them, gives Simmons all that room to operate. They've lost a bit of that this year. Embiid was relatively healthy last year, but like you say, they just have to sort of wrap him in bubble wrap to get him through the each year and on back-to-backs. I'm worried that the organisation is currently rudderless without the GM. Like, what moves are they going to make until a GM's in play? They're not good enough yet. If you're a free agent and yes, they've got rid of him now, but you know that's an environment where it's cost people like Jahlil Okafor money. Are you going to want to go there? I wonder if that's going to have a long-term impact on their ability to recruit and improve this team going forwards. Ceiling, despite everything which feels like I've just said is negative, they could be a 2 seed. They're going to get to the Eastern Conference semi-finals, but they might even make the Eastern Conference Finals. Who knows? The floor for me, the minute Embiid goes down, they go down, barring that ridiculous run they had at the end of the regular season. And yeah, that's my take on them. Anyone got any other bits they want to add on for the 76ers?
Yeah. Go on, you go, Joe.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I love how you brought up Simmons' jump shot. I'm with you, it doesn't matter. But my problem with jump shooting on this team is actually not of him, it's with Embiid. So Joel Embiid had a very good, we'll call it rookie year, shooting 37% from three. He shot 30% from three last year. And when I was watching them in the playoffs, I know some of this was game script because they were down by a lot, but he kept shooting threes. And I kind of thought that is exactly where Boston want him. He is an absolute phenom on the inside. Look, like, the post game's dead, but the pick and roll attack in the paint is not dead. For me, if I'm an NBA defense, if I'm Brad Stevens or Nick Nurse, I want Joel Embiid shooting threes. I don't want that guy destroying my small ball lineups on the inside and forcing me to bring on sort of unskilled 7-foot big men from the bench. So, and that's kind of where I think they've got to maybe change it. He's not an elite stretch center. He's not Karl Anthony Towns who's shooting 42% from three. He's a decent shooter. He should only be used sparingly. So that's a philosophical thing I think Philly have got to change from. That's why my floor for them, I don't see them going lower than 4. I could maybe see like Milwaukee pushing over them with their coaching change. They've probably got the best player in the conference as well. But I don't see any lower than 4, even if Embiid goes down. They've still got Simmons, they've got Saric, they've potentially got Markelle Fultz, they've got Reddit. There's still enough there for me to be a top home advantage seed.
I think it'll be interesting. You bring up Markelle Fultz, how they make it work with Fultz and Simmons this season. It's not really a problem that they had last year with Fultz being out for so long, and then when he came back, sort of playing on the bench and didn't get much action in the postseason. But neither of them are really going to be useful for you off the ball. So the question will be, how do you get the two to work together, work in tandem? We've seen, Ben Simmons be pretty outlandish about the fact that he's the point guard. He came out and said that at the beginning of last season before Markelle Fultz even got injured. So I do think that could be a potential issue. And I just think, I know obviously like you talked about, Jason Kidd or Asen Kidd, but I mean, I just think that the league is so different. And I think that, if I recall correctly, that 0-2 Nets team, they didn't even play a 50-win team en route to the finals. It was a really weak Eastern Conference.
The East was pretty dire back then. They did it twice, though.
That's true. They did do it twice. You have to give them credit, but I just think, more importantly than even the strength of the East, the game is very different. And as good as a talent as he is, and he is great, I mean, he's going to have a great regular season. There will be times that I do think that his deficiencies will come back to bite him. And, I think that could potentially be a bit of an issue here in terms of the floor, but I don't see them dropping any less than, the 4th seed at worst. And I really do think it's 1, 2, 3, and then there's a gap. So I just think they're sort of sandwiched at 3 here. But that would potential chemistry issues is the only thing and obviously injuries is the only thing I can see them setting them back.
It's really interesting, actually, that we've spoken about 76ers now, and it has felt generally like quite a negative conversation. But how times have changed, where we're saying like this could go wrong, this is a red flag, but we're still putting them in the 3rd seed. What a turnaround for the franchise! So the over/under, the Vegas odds are 54.5. Unsurprisingly, I've got them way under that. I've got them at 50. I might just sack off these Eastern Conference predictions. I've really fluffed these. What have you got them at, Joe?
I've got them just over, I think. Yeah, just over. It's gonna be close. Just one thing I want to add on Fultz. I don't know if you guys have seen. There's a video of him going around shooting shots in an open gym. Why the hell does anyone care when a player shoots shots in an open gym? I'm going to tell you why I don't care. Because for years, I used to watch Ricky Rubio videos in the off season, and someone would have a video of this guy nailing 23s in a row. I'd go, yeah, Ricky Rubio's going to be a good shooter this year. Regular season comes around, he's still shooting like 29% from three. So I don't care what he does in an open gym. I care what he does on opening night and beyond.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I've got them just over. I think they'll be around sort of 55, 56 at best. I just think that, even with all the issues, I think they'll make it work because it will sort of be a repeat of last year. It wasn't smooth sailing last year with injuries and, players coming in at certain points and, with whatnot, but they still made it work and they were still able to, albeit through a last push, make it to the third seed. And now, again, like we've mentioned before, LeBron isn't there. So that provides them with a little extra leeway in terms of making mistakes. So I just think that, 55, third seed, that should be it.
No, yeah, all good points. Okay, so let's move on from the three good teams. And in fact, that's based on the last pod. We've had 8 straight good teams. We're going to now annoy some Knicks fans and dive into some of the worst teams in the league. So let's have a look at the New York Knicks, who were 29 and 53 last season. I think they finished I can't even remember. It was way out of the playoffs at least. It was in fact the 11th seed. They obviously lost Porzingis to a horrific ACL injury, which he's recovering from. In fact, there's a YouTube series, I don't know if you guys have seen this at all, that's Porzingis' comeback. It's a documentary he started himself. I started watching it. It was interesting. I learned that the night he tore his ACL, he and his brothers got together and had a shot of tequila to celebrate new beginnings, which seems rather odd. But the Knicks, has anyone got anything good to say about them? I love winding up Knicks fans. Here we go.
Now, Mike, you might want to sit down for what I'm about to say, because I am a well-known New York Knicks hater. Well, people think I'm a New York hater. I'm actually quite hopeful for this squad this year. I can't believe I'm saying that. It all depends on Porzingis' recovery, but I really rate Fizdale as a coach. I thought actually, as bad as Memphis' roster was last year, I don't think they would have had that god-awful season if he'd stayed. I think he did a good job while he was there. The vibe I got last year, I didn't watch loads of Knicks live, but I've watched quite a lot of their tape back, like I do every off-season. And I got this vibe with Hornacek that it honestly looked like he didn't care about the team sort of from March onwards. He was just kind of there because he wanted his payoff, basically. But this is a team that I think there's a decent core in there. Frank Ntilikina is the guy I'm looking at. He's who I'm hopeful for. So if you've seen any of David Fizdale's comments, he believes Ntilikina is a point guard, not a shooting guard, and he wants him to have that sort of court vision. I think Fizdale is going to coach him into a floor general, and that is why I'm actually relatively excited to watch this team this year.
I understand that about David Fizdale, but ultimately I just think that Chris Porzingis, it's such a cloud that hangs over another cloud that is the New York Knicks. Just like, we've heard reports that potentially he could be back at Christmas, but it's most likely February. But for me, even if he does come back early or he comes back, you just don't know about him and re-injuring himself. You don't know how well he's going to be when he comes back, how long they're going to take to nurse him back, whether or not, when you're just that large and mobile and to experience injury so early, it's never a good sign. But I do think something that's quite interesting is this rookie they got in the second round, this Mitchell Robinson. I didn't actually know about his story until I started looking into the Knicks, but I found out he was, turns out I didn't know he was actually a 5-star recruit back in high school, McDonald's All-American, and ended up deciding not to go to college or, playing professionally or anything, and was the first person to sort of not play. I think he left Western Kentucky after a month, and because of that, he couldn't play in the G League. So he's just been sort of working out by himself. But someone who could have potentially been a higher pick was obviously drafted in the second round. They brought in Kevin Knox as well, who looked really impressive in the summer league. So I think they got some nice young. The fact that they're both young and talented big men could potentially offset, KP's injury, but at the end of the day, they're not going to be Porzingis. And I have serious worries for guys over 7 feet. They get injured as much as he does, no matter how talented they are. Fizdale is a great coach, and I do think that will help them, and you'll definitely see improvements on the floor with the schemes that they run and how they play. But the fact they play in this division as well, you got 12 games where you're playing the Celtics, the Raptors, and the Sixers, and that's not a good sign. You could easily go at least. It wouldn't be surprising to see them go 2-10, 3-9, something in those sort of games. And how do you make up, that deficit in the rest of the league? So I just think it's going to be a real tough season for them going forward.
Do you know what? I led deliberately being negative, but I'm actually in agreement with Joe that this is a it's not the Knicks of old. I feel like with the addition of Fizdale, the front office shake-up last year, they're getting rid of Noah, which is great. I know Porzingis is out, but the pickup of Knox, it feels like, although the players aren't there yet, it feels like the organisation is putting the people in the right place that they can build around and move forwards with. The bad is obviously Porzingis' knee. You're right. I hate it when a big guy goes down with lower limb injuries. It's going to be interesting to see whether he comes back this season, because there was like a Q&A. I think they called it a town hall with the president, and one of the fans said to him, like, given his injuries, are you going to hold him out for the year? And they didn't deny it. They said, we've got to do what's best for his long-term health. So there's a possibility he doesn't suit up at all this year, which, if that's the right thing for the player, then great. And with an ACL, you're expecting some sapping of athleticism. Well, he's what, 7'4"?
Yeah, but
doesn't need to be uber athletic. He's not an uber athlete anyway. I'm not overly concerned with the ACL as long as they rehab it and don't rush him back. There was talk as well. It was funny because I read that about him not coming back at all next year, and then I read that in about a week after the All-Star break, they're having their Latvian appreciation night or something like that, Latvian heritage night. So I didn't even realise there was a big Latvian population over in New York, but they will be appreciated on that night. So Porzingis may be back for that. Who knows?
I hope he is back, because one of my notes here is that I'll just read the note. I've got Porzingis as a 7-foot rim protector with an outside shot. Enes Kanter is a 7-foot non-rim protector with no outside shot. I cannot watch Enes Kanter play basketball for the whole season. I've gotten into debates with Knicks fans. They say he's good. He puts up the most empty stat. That guy will never be relevant on a good team. So if Porzingis isn't back, you're looking at a top 4 pick. I know that contradicts what I've just said, but that is more because that's how good I think Porzingis is. I think he turns this team from like a 25-win team into like a 35-40-win team, just because of how special he is on both ends. The guy I'm actually quite interested to watch, they signed Mario Hezonja. Now, Hezonja has not met the expectations that certainly I and our old colleague Thomas Robry had for him. We had him as like a top 3 player in that class. But let's be honest, he played for the Magic. They have just they've stashed young players for the last sort of 4 years and not really developed many of them. So one of my takes on here is that I think Hezonja is going to build himself into a very solid role player. And actually, Mike, I'm looking at that Porzingis news. If he doesn't come back this year, the record's going to be bad. You might have crappy attendances. But playing devil's advocate, maybe that's a good thing for the rest of the roster, because actually sometimes on bad teams, you look at the Process Sixers, for example, there's not many players relevant in that era, but Rob Covington emerged from that group of players as someone good. I'm maybe reckoning, can someone like Mario Hezonja, a Lance Thomas, a Kevin Knotts, can some of these guys emerge on a bad team? And then when Porzingis does come back in 1920, you've got solid players around him who have had a year to sort of embed themselves in the organisation.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. If he doesn't come back, they've picked a bad year to do it, because we've had the the draft lottery reform. So if they, so the worst three records will have a 14% chance, which has dropped significantly. Then 12.5, 10.5, 9, 7.5. So they've really sort of, this is that anti-tanking strategy. So it's not even like if he doesn't come back, they can just chuck it all in and hope to get number one seed. There's no guarantee of that this year. I think the Hazonia, this is I was really high on him when he came into the league. I remember going all in on my fantasy draft and picking him up far earlier than he should have picked up an unproven rookie, and then promptly just sobbing through the season as he failed to do anything of significance. He can play. He's a good player. I hope he takes advantage of this. It's going to be interesting to see whether guys like Timi Hardaway Jr. can sort of capitalise on the there was sort of bubbling and effervescence around his sort of abilities on the court last season. He was not thought of highly, still isn't particularly, but has been a guy who can provide a sort of a scoring punch. It's going to be interesting to see how he can develop. What are you guys' ceilings for the Knicks? Do any of you have them making the playoffs in a best case situation?
No, I don't have them making the playoffs. I have them. I'm sort of being realistic about Porzingis, but I have them at sort of 32 wins at best. I think they can be better than that, but I'm just saying with it's a health situation, I think the best scenario for them is them getting him back and him sort of being back to his usual self, but having some time to sort of get off the rust. And I just think that in this division, and I think another thing that could potentially sort of, I do agree with you guys that I think this team is on the rise and they're on their way, but it is going to take some time. And who knows whether, Fizdale and the Knicks decide to actually take a plunge and make a trade to sort of think about the future, whether it's opening up more cap space or whatever moving forward. We heard Fizdale say that there was potential that could happen during the season. And obviously a move like that would be probably in the expense of wins. So because of all those, sort of potential circumstances and just so much uncertainty with Porzingis, I see them about 32 wins at best. I do think that they can be an entertaining team. I do think that they can bring some life into the Garden, which may help James Dolan if he decides to sell, which would probably be great for every New Yorker everywhere. But
actually, that's a good I had, is that we haven't had any James Dolan stories for a while, which is great because, I can't stand that guy. But it's amazing that how trash the Knicks have been, they still have a top 10 attendance throughout the league. Which, it's MSG, it's the Knicks, whatever, it's New York. It shows that people will still turn out and watch bad basketball in one part of New York. And I say that because we'll get onto the Nets in a minute. So you've got them over at the Vegas odds are 29.5. I had them over as well. I had them at 33. Mainly because I am expecting Porzingis to come back towards the end of the season, and I just think he's that impactful a player. Joe?
I actually, when I first did these, I did actually have them at the 8 seed. Then I did a little bit more research on his injury. I was under the impression he was going to be back in sort of mid to late November, so I thought, that's not too long without him. I've moved them down now because also someone brought some stats to my attention that showed I was underrating the Pistons a little bit. So I've got them at 37. That goes down by quite a lot if Porzingis doesn't come back at all. But again, that's all on Fizdale. But actually, I'll transition you into the floor now. My worry for this team is, as much as I like Fizdale as a coach, he's a bit of a time bomb as a person. The first thing he said in his press conference was, "I do not want cupcake players on my team." That was the first. That was the first thing he said. Now, so we'll go to the Marc Gasol thing at Memphis. Regardless of what anyone thinks of how Gasol handled that, Gasol had no problems with Dave Yeager. He had no problems with Lionel Hollins. So you've got to sort of assume that Fizdale was maybe as at fault for the problem. And I'm looking at a guy like Enes Kanter, he's really corny on Twitter. I just think if that team's quite bad, Fizdale is a guy who wants to win now. He said, I'm not going on a tanking team. I want to win now. I can just see if that team's 18 and 30 or something, that could get quite ugly and that could really derail the team. But I do think that they would commit to getting rid of the guys going against Fizdale rather than Fizdale himself.
do you think perhaps that Gasol's lack of issues with Hollins and Jaeger was because they were winning?
Yeah.
The minute the winnings disappeared, that's when we start to see DeMarcus Cousins in Sacramento situations.
Yeah, I think that's some of it. And I think, a lot of people when that happened said maybe Jaeger and Fizdale, like, really mollycoddled him. I can promise you now, like, they're probably, like, certainly Lionel Hollins, he's not going to mollycoddle anyone. Like, I think they're disciplinarians, those two coaches. So, yeah, that was definitely some of it. There's obviously a lot of pressure. You've got to remember that team had a lot of injuries as well. So, the tension goes up. They entered.
I'm pretty sure Fizdale's also said he doesn't like European centres, which kind of is the Knicks.
yeah. That's what's going to derail his personality. But maybe he's learned from his time in Memphis.
Yeah. Okay. So let's hurriedly leave the Knicks behind and go to the other New York-based team, and a team that was 29th in attendance last year, the Brooklyn Nets, 28-54. Who wants to start us off with the good?
You go on.
I'll give it a go. I'm not a huge fan of most of their players. Now, someone that listeners might not know is Jamie Oppenheim. He's one of our editors. If he's let's just say he's very blunt about this Brooklyn Nets team. He will say it how it is with this roster. The one thing I like about this team, I think the offensive scheme is very good. A stat that's come out in the last sort of year or so is potential assists. A lot of people rubbish it. I like it because I think it shows how many shots your scheme creates, not like outside of isolation. So they are top 5 in potential assists, which means they're moving the ball and they're creating catch and shoot opportunities. And the note I've got down here is if you stick a good player in this team, a top 50 player, they're probably like a borderline playoff team. The problem is they don't have that good player yet. They've got a lot of guys who are okay, like Dinwiddie's quite good. Jarrett Allen might be a decent rim-running centre. People talk about Karis LeVert. D'Angelo Russell is okay. That's what they've got. They've got a team of okay players and a solid coach who sort of definitely knows what he's doing. But, a lot of people sort of talk about this team and how all these players are good. If the players were as good as people were saying, they wouldn't have won 28 games last year. And that sounds a little bit simplistic, but like we've got to look at this roster for what it is. It's pretty ordinary.
Yeah, I think, last season I looked as well, and it was interesting when, even after Jeremy Lin went down, before D'Angelo Russell's injury, they were actually quite a solid offense. And then obviously his injury sort of, 3 months out, and it all sort of stipend. I think that they can be an exciting team this year. They've got some exciting players. I think, D'Angelo Russell came out a few weeks ago and said he's in the best place ever. He's obviously trying to get that extension from his rookie deal, so I really think he's going to push himself to be the leader of this team. Spencer Dinwiddie might be the best player for value guy in the whole NBA when you think about the fact that he's making about $1.6 million this year, the final year of his deal. Also, I thought he brought a real spark to the team last season. But yeah, I just don't see. I mean, I wrote my season preview for this team that's coming out soon, and I just don't really see them doing anything special. Again, like the New York Knicks, they suffer from the fact that they're in this conference. They've got 12 games against the Celtics, Raptors, and Sixers, and last season in the conference, in the division, they were 1-15, and I wouldn't, I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of repeat performance. I don't think it'll be that bad because, again, I don't think the Knicks are as good as they were last season, or at least they don't have Porzingis. But similar sort of low numbers in the division. It's going to be really tough for them, and they just don't really play a whole lot of defense. I'm interested. I think the pickups are work for the players that they have in terms of Ed Davis and Kenneth Faried, and obviously coming from, this is a team that's going to be very guard heavy in terms of who holds the ball, but I think that they'll be able to, like you said, Joe, move the ball around and get them some looks inside, mainly sort of probably just finishing off at the rim and whatnot. But I do think it's going to be a tough season for them, but they will excite. I think there'll be some games. There were some games last season. I think there'll be some games this season where you'll see them lose. Like I think they lost like 130 to 123 to Indiana last year. I think you'll see some fun games like that from them but it's not going to be great in terms of wins.
Yeah, for me, the good, I liked the pickup of Ed Davis. I said how disappointed I was Portland let him go on the last pod. I like the pickup of Dudley, and I like the pickup of Fareed, because they're not superstars by any stretch, but they are savvy vets who can temper a locker room. There's been a lot of turnover this year. They've lost at least 7 players, which is another good thing, because that was a terrible team last year. I agree with Joe. They haven't got a superstar. This is a team full of secondary options and role players who needs a big guy to not physically big, but a big star to lead them. They're just not going to get one. There's no one's going to want to go to Brooklyn, in my opinion. I think that. I think the GM and the coach have got a tall order ahead of them to try and rebuild this franchise. They kind of were left up a certain type of creek by the was it Billy King? Billy King, I want to say. Yeah. So that's obviously Kenny Atkinson and Sean Marks who have taken over the past couple of years. The bad for me is that your star player is D'Angelo Russell. Yeah, he's in a contract year, but I don't trust him physically with his injury last year, and just in general from probably harking back to I just don't trust him because of the Nick Young saga in LA, which I'm sure Timmy remembers as a Laker fan.
Gosh.
Yeah. I'm just like, that's just marred his. Not that I'm for or against that situation. I just don't think it should have escalated the way it did. The bad is that they're the Nets.
Yeah, this is Russell. I just don't think he's very good. If I'm being harsh, please let me know. But he
has good games, but then so does anyone. Really,
he's like an ultra poor man's Jeff Teague. Like, you watch it and you think he looks smooth, but then you look at the scores at the end of the night and you kind of think, oh my god, is that it? Like, with all that usage he had, he put up like 16 and 5 on 44% shooting. It's just he's ordinary, and I do think he's the kind of player, though, who will step it up in a contract year. So he might be a dark horse shout for like a most improved player. It would obviously have to be a very weak class for that. But on this team, there's a lot of praise that goes out for Sean Marks. I'm very much on Jamie's side that I think he's made a lot of obvious moves. Like, he was just better than the last guys. I love the Fareed move, though. Fareed's one of those players who, when I evaluate him, I have to take off my sort of analyst hat, because I don't know how good he is. I don't know how valuable a 4 who can't shoot is, but that guy is so fun to watch. Like, when I think of those Denver Nuggets teams from George Karl, all I think of is them like getting an offensive rebound and the manimal just launching down the floor and dunking it on a full court. So he's going to be, they're going to have a lot of highlights.
Yeah. Well, this is one of my points that I had as well, but I have it under bad. Because that George Karl team was 4 years ago now?
Yeah.
He's just sat on the pine for the last 4 years being messed around by the Nuggets. Have we missed for an undersized guy who relies on athleticism as a power forward, have we missed his window of peak manimal, which was amazing? I absolutely loved just the way he used to fly around one end. He'd be just catching lobs, the other end he would be swatting stuff into the 10th row. Have we missed that? And has he missed out on an opportunity to diversify his game by adding some semblance of a mid-range jump shot or some kind of post move that, and let's look at another extreme like Dwight Howard, and we talk about this a lot on the pod. This is a guy who relied heavily on athleticism, and the minute that left him, he just became surplus to requirements in every team he's been on. Yeah. Are we going to get... This is my fear, because I like to say, again, I love the manimal, but I'm just not convinced he's that guy anymore.
Yeah, I think Dwight Howard, to go on your point, he's like one of the top 5 wasted talents ever for that reason that you said. I'm not going to be as harsh when it comes to Kenneth Fareed, but I think that if you look at the way the game has changed from when he was at his peak and when Denver went 38-3 at home that season, if you'd have to say, name a few players who have suffered from the way the game has changed, I think you look at Kenneth Fareed, because, like you said, overly reliant on athleticism, no real shot, and also he's a power forward. You've got coaches in the league like Brad Stevens who aren't even using those kind of positions anymore. I think, what does he use? Ball handlers, wings, big men. So people aren't even really using fours in a traditional sense in many ways. So I think he's definitely suffered from that. And it's sad to see that he hasn't taken the time to sort of expand his game beyond his gifts. So, it has been a bit of a waste these last few years, and the way that Denver has moved on as a team, and how they've transformed themselves with the new young guys that they've got. I still think there's a chance for him to be exciting and to get some highlights. I think that there's a lot of excitement that will come from this team. I agree with Joe about D'Angelo Russell being fun, but it not translating to much. He doesn't translate to much to stats, and he doesn't translate much to wins. But yeah, Kenneth Faried, he'll get some highlights, so it will be fun to see at times. But I think that it's definitely passed. We've definitely passed on him.
Yeah, if you're 6'8", I expect you to be a wing in this NBA.
I think what they've done with Davis and Faried, they've gone all in on like offensive rebounding. Yeah. They already play at pace. They already play at pace, and they get a lot. I think they like top 5 in offensive possessions anyway. They've obviously gone, we're not very good in the half court. Let's just create more of these possessions. So that's what they've got all in on. But, oh, God, man, I love slandering, but I just cannot slander Kenneth Faried. He's like one of my favourites.
I'm not slandering. I love him.
No, you guys are right. You guys are right in what you're saying about it, but I'm just there like holding back the tears because I'm like, I love this guy. Yeah, I love Kenneth Faried.
Pour one out for the manimal.
And he's a great personality as well. I see him on like Instagram sometimes at all these little Fortnite events, and he just seems like a cool guy to be around. It's sad to see, but it's just the reality. Like,
yeah. Oh well, did we get a ceiling and a floor on this? We've completely gone down a manimal hole. Ceiling for this team,
I'd say like. I think.
How low does it have to be a step versus a ceiling?
I mean, they won 28 last year, so I would say the ceiling is like, 31, 32? They could probably win a couple more games.
I'd agree.
Their young players have they had quite a few close losses last year. Hopefully the young players have learned from them. But, I mean, the floor is...
it's a basement.
The floor is the...
I said, does a bottomless pit have a floor in my notes?
I mean, I've got them at the... I always call it the 14 seed. There's no 14 seed, but that's where I've got them. I've got them at 14, only above the Magic. But, I mean, the floor is, the 15 position, 19, 20 wins. I really think that.
Yeah, you said the ceiling would be 32. Vegas odds has them at 32.5. It sounds like we're all going under on that. I've gone 26.
Yeah, I'm well under. I've got 23.
I got 27.
So we've all gone under on it. I just think this is just it's difficult for this franchise because, and it's not the current personnel fault at all. They are still suffering from historical mismanagement, and it's a long way back up, unfortunately. Cool. So can anyone think of anything else they want to say about the Brooklyn Nets? I actually made a pact last season that I wouldn't watch a Nets game, so I feel a bit disingenuous talking about them. I did end up watching a couple, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it a lot of the time because it's a bit car crash TV for me. Anyone want to add anything?
I mean,
no, let's leave it there then. That sounds like we had a question on the Nets actually, which I think we answered quite well from Ginger Shack. Do the Nets have a roster to attempt to push for a winning season and potentially the playoffs? We've all kind of landed on a firm no there. With the addition of Faried, or will this be yet another disappointing season for them? I have to say a lot for Spencer Dinwiddie. Really enjoyed his time in Chicago. I think there is Spencer Dinwiddie love on the podcast, but just not enough to convert that into anywhere near a playoff win total.
They're good. They're like solid player, but none of them move the needle, in my opinion. No. Not without the star. You could maybe add them to a team with like one good player and they move the needle, but alone, they're not doing it.
Yeah, they'd need to be around 500 for me to have a chance at the playoffs, and I just don't think they'll be anywhere near that.
I mean, I don't even think they're going to be better than like Atlanta and Charlotte, let alone pushing Detroit, Miami, and Washington in the bottom seeds.
Yeah, I've got them above Atlanta. That's it. I just don't. But we'll get on to Atlanta next time. So the Atlantic Division odds from Sky Bet, because we did this last week as well, and people seem to like that. The Celtics are 10-11. The 76ers are 9-4. The Raptors are 5-2. The New York Knicks are 33-1, and the Brooklyn Nets are 50-1. I think it's fair to say that this division starts out strong and then absolutely falls off a cliff towards the end, which has been a bit of an interesting thing to talk about, because quite often we don't talk about the teams at the bottom. So if you're not following us already, we are at Double Clutch UK on all social media platforms, so your Facebook, your Twitter, Instagram. Timi does a lot of the social media stuff with us at the minute. You do a lot of our Instagram stuff along with Ross. Obviously, check out the site, doubleclutch.uk. That's got all our latest articles. We're going to be back. I think we're recording Sunday night, another divisional preview. But other than that, thank you very much for listening. We'll catch you again soon.